see the world through other people's eyes. Now, empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.
Hi, it's Edwin Rutsch, and this is Dialogues on How to Build a Culture of Empathy, and I'm here today with Alex Gabbay. Thanks for joining me, Alex.
No, it's nice to be here.
Yeah, you're in England, in the UK, and you're a filmmaker, and you've done quite a few documentaries, and you have one out that we want to talk about was Love, Hate, and Everything in Between. And it's located at, you can find the website for it at empathyfilm.com. So really glad to hear about your film and kind of how you came about to make this film. And because, you know, I'm working on empathy and how we can build a culture of empathy. So really would like to hear about, you know, a little bit about your background and how you came to make this documentary.
Okay, well, it could be a very long story, but I'll try and make it.
We have time.
Okay. Fundamentally, I'm a documentary filmmaker, and I started making films in Asia. And you know, I dealt with a lot of subjects and usually development. So there was an opportunity to make a film about art and science looking at consciousness. And I was in England, and I took that opportunity, and I made this film. And in a way, I see that as the beginning of the empathy film, because had I not made the consciousness film, I would never have even thought of making the empathy film. Because this is a deviation from the sort of films I normally make, which is some more development films, and this is into a series on the mind. So the empathy film came about because I was in Israel, and I was walking with a lot of people trekking. And I had spoken to everyone except this one older lady, and I spoke to her, and I was explaining the film about consciousness and about artists and so on. And she said, "Oh, that would be, my daughter would be fascinated by that." And I asked her what her daughter did. And her daughter was a neuroscientist looking for empathy in Israel. So for me, that was a very good starting point. The idea, it fitted all the criteria, a film about the mind, an important aspect of the mind, probably the most important aspect of our sort of human behavior. And there was obviously a slight hook, as in, you know, Israel, empathy, and so on.
Okay, so you in general, you were interested in just the mind and consciousness. And what was the impetus for that? Was there something there that was like an inspiration for that series?
I think I thought of it was just serendipity, just a chance meeting with someone.
Oh, okay.
But I think in terms of my background, I had worked a lot with Tibetan Buddhists in terms of filming, and I'd also filmed a lot of I don't know, development, which is in a sense, you know, about hardship. And so I think the fusion, my own personal journey going through Asia, working with, you know, Buddhists, coming to England, and then this particular event that sort of created that, I sort of feel, looking back, that I'm actually qualified to look at it from different perspectives. And this is, in fact, one of the things that got me into film, is this idea of looking at things from different perspectives. I don't know if you ever saw, there was an advert from The Guardian. It was actually a television advert to read The Guardian newspaper, and they had showed a skinhead running after an old man, and, you know, eventually catching him and throwing him to the ground. And you thought, my God, that looks terrible. What the hell is he going to do with him? He's going to beat him badly. And then they showed you the same event played from a higher window in this office. And you saw the skinhead running after the old man. You saw him catch him, push him at the moment that a car appeared to be. So he was actually saving him from being famous. So that made me think very much about perspectives. And I think, in a way, empathy is about perspectives. It's about understanding that your perspective is not the only perspective, that there are other perspectives, and there are connected perspectives, shared perspectives.
So it's just that notion of that people have different perspectives, and you're wanting to look at that quality of perspective taking, which kind of brings us into the definition of empathy. You know, I've interviewed quite a few people around empathy, some scientists as well, who have, you know, been exploring, you know, what's the definitions. There seems to be a lot of different definitions, different ways of defining it. And I was wondering, you know, what kind of came up, what did you come up with as your basic working definition?
I think we decided to begin the film with many definitions because there are so many. I think the first thing it is it's not sympathy. That was the first confusion that everybody seems to have. It's very different from sympathy. It doesn't have an active part to it. You just have to understand. You don't have to sympathize. You don't have to act out anything. You don't have to do anything. A lot of people called it connectedness, spontaneous, something you either do or you don't have. I think what an interesting definition came from a primatologist who talked about how each every species can be judged on how, you know, how high they are on the empathetic scale based on their level of self-recognition. So a sort of prerequisite to empathy is that you define the self. The more defined you are, or you define, the more self-defined you are, then the more the ability to understand the other. So for me, it's all about self and other. And it's about, you have on one scale someone who only understands himself and has no perspective of others, doesn't even open that possibility. And then you have the other perspective, the other end of the spectrum, which is people who are so empathic that they lose the sense of self and confuse it with the other. So I suppose a healthy sense of empathy is somewhere in the middle, where you know who you are, you know that the pain you're feeling is not somebody else's pain, it's not your pain, sorry, but you empathize by understanding it as if it was your pain.
Was that primatologist Franz de Waal by chance?
Really, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, he's got a model of empathy. He calls it the Russian doll model, right? It's like that there's kind of like a basic level of empathy that, you know, many animals have, maybe emotional contagion. Then there's another level that's kind of based on the next level of the brain, and then the next level of the brain. And it kind of fits together like the Russian doll. And as humans, we have maybe the big doll, you know, component of empathy. So, you know, another way of defining empathy is, you know, it's like it's actually the metaphor. Standing in someone else's shoes, looking through someone else's eyes is like the most common definition, and that's just like a metaphor. And for me, empathy is like a cornucopia, in the sense that it kind of opens up this door to experiencing, you know, other people's feelings, and there's kind of like a richness of experience. And so, kind of looking at it from metaphorically, how would you define empathy? What's your metaphor of empathy? What is empathy like to you metaphorically?
It's very difficult to boil it into, you know, boil it down into one metaphor. I think it would be to do with a mirror and understanding, you know, like I like the one of seeing through someone else's eyes, but it's in a sense seeing yourself in someone else's eyes. So it's because you do understand emotions very much through a person's eyes, obviously not just the person's eyes, but so I think it would be seeing yourself in someone else's eyes, perhaps something like that. But that could be misconstrued completely as the wrong thing. I think I think empathy is a difficult one, because even in the film we go through the empathic sort of break down the empathic into cognitive and like mirror neurons. So you have the cognitive is the one that sort of understands by predicting what's going to happen next, and understands as opposed to sort of the mind working as opposed to feeling. And the other side is the mirror neuron, which is more a kind of automatic process where we recognize in someone else ourselves, and our mirror neurons fire with the same processes as what they're doing. So I think it's difficult with because putting yourself in someone else's shoes also sort of suggests that it's the mental process. I would like to think that it's a healthy combination of both the cognitive and the sort of emotional.
Yeah, well, there is so much I don't know if it's confusion, but many different definitions. So it kind of muddies the understanding quite a bit, and I've been trying to get some clarity, for myself, and I've kind of created like a 4 parts of empathy. The first part is self-empathy, which is like sensory awareness of ourselves, and you get that through mindfulness, just what's going on in my own body. The second part is a mirrored empathy through mirror neurons. So as you're shaking your head, I'm feeling that shaking, what the intensity of it and the within my own body through mirror neurons. Then the third part is I call it imaginative empathy, which is kind of the cognitive empathy or perspective taking, that I can actually, put myself in your situation. That's usually kind of based on that sense of self-awareness, which you were talking about. And then the fourth part is empathic action, that as we kind of see our common humanity, that we're kind of like wired to naturally want to contribute to each other's well-being, and we just kind of act in a way that contributes, to others' well-being. So that's kind of where I'm kind of have gotten to.
No, I think that's a very nice way of putting it.
Yeah, and then there's kind of I call it the wheel of empathy, because it's kind of like a process. And then there's the feel of empathy. Just what does it feel like in your body, as a felt bodily. And so I'm wondering, how do you feel when you're feeling empathy? Like, what's going on? Like, if you feel your own body, what are you kind of feeling?
To be honest, in my case, when I feel empathy, it's usually quite sad. It's usually tripped by seeing someone in need, and it's that sort of, I don't know. I mean, I think I'm probably more of a mind person. So, but certainly things where I see a sort of helplessness, or someone someone who's not being taken care of, and someone who doesn't take care of themselves, and a sort of I sort of feel empathy for that person, that they're obviously suffering. So I mean, then it usually responds with a sort of a feeling of depression.
That's that's pretty. I don't know. It's sad in one way. It's funny in another. So, well, that's kind of like that's really not empathy in the sense. That's kind of like the sympathy component. You're kind of going into sympathy. You're not just doing the reflective, and you're not stepping into the empathic action or the compassionate action part of it at that point. So, but it seems like you're very tuned into the suffering of the world in general. Maybe
too much exposure.
So
but well, no, just from working in film in Asia, I think I saw quite a lot of things that I didn't understand, and it took me a long time to work them out. So.
Was that in war situations? Or?
No. Actually, I mean, I think war is, funny enough, is easier to understand. I think it's actually understanding why, why people don't have the basic things they need, or why a child dies. If you're in in a very rural setting and they can't get to hospital in time, or a woman dies and her baby dies, and it's actually quite useless, and so on. So it was a lot of things like that, sort of documenting that sort of stuff, which I found quite disturbing. And I think you go through you do go through the empathic part of trying to, you feel very bad for the person, and then you because if you can't work out why, then you feel depressed by it. So
Well, for me, I kind of focus on the fun part of empathy because I do kind of like freestyle dance, like
Oh, right.
that's kind of like my emotional, kind of release. And
Mm,
so every week, a couple times, I'm doing freestyle dance, and it's, there's a lot of empathy in that because the person are
mm.
moving, you're
Yeah,
interacting,
sure.
and we're mirroring each other, and there's a lot of creativity. And I would think that as an artist, that would be kind of part of your experience as well.
Mm. I think it's funny. There's a lot of people have said, like, we should have had film, 100 people watching the film in the film. So we should have filmed people watching a film. And I think filmmakers, maybe our sort of most empathic side is trying to work with an audience, with an imaginary audience. Um, so it's creating empathy in a different way, not quite as spontaneous as what you're saying, but more sort of trying to, if you like, dance with the audience in the sense that here's the material, it needs to speak to the audience in a certain way. If I arrange it in this way, it speaks in this way, and so on. So and this particular film took a lot of dancing, as in it took about a year and a half to get the pieces together that we needed. Um, but it's done quite well, so I'm quite pleased. It's had a very good reaction, and it seems like it's going to be used quite heavily. So
So
that's good.
are you in the stage now, kind of at the film festivals or looking for distributors, or kind of where are you at with
We've sort of both we're in the middle of both stages. So we showed it first in the London International Documentary Festival. It's showed in Ireland in a science festival. It's showing in the Royal Society of Arts in London. It's going to be showing in Paris Science, which is a French film festival on science. But we've also got a distributor in the United States, which is Films for Humanity. So they're going to be doing the educational market. And that's really exciting because obviously they have a massive database of people that they send their catalogs to. And they're sort of pushing the film. So they're putting it on one of their covers. It's going in 3 different catalogs. So I wish that the American model for distributing films for education had a counterpart in other countries, but there isn't. Unfortunately, the Americans do it best when it comes to distributing educational material. So it started off really well, and yeah, I think it's going to be shown on Swedish educational television. So I think it's one of the things that I think you asked, or you sort of indicated you would ask, is about the question of how you make a change in getting people more empathic, or at least aware of empathy. And I think it's about awareness of empathy. I think people need to, who knows what the word means? A lot of people are confused by it. After knowing what it means, what does it mean to you? Understanding what it means to you and to the other person in different situations. So I think schools, starting very young in distributing films to schools. You probably know of Roots of Empathy, the Canadian lady who's takes the
Mary Gordon? Uh-huh.
Mary Gordon, yeah, um, and taking it. We had one chap in our film called Theodore Zeldin, and he talked about the biggest sort of change that you can make in anyone's understanding is a personal change. So the idea of intimate conversations with people, actually talking to people properly about things, so exchanging, and that could come about in the family, that could come about at workplace. A judge could listen more carefully. So it's about listening, it's about talking one to one. And I think through that sort of idea of exchange of self and other, you build us and them, and you build it differently. Because at the minute, the way I see it, the society is moving very much into a very individualistic state. Um, at the same time, obviously, there's a lot of move towards a sort of more collective way of thinking, but consumerism, pressure, and so on makes people think as individuals. And the downside to that is obviously that as an individual under pressure, you don't think of the other. You think of the other as a nuisance. You think of the other as not someone who can help you. So I think breaking that down and understanding the fact that people are more connected, that we do need each other, creates a better, develops us and them from self and other, and a better form of us and them. So there's less of an animosity and in group and out group. So
yes, that was kind of around the question of how do we build a culture of empathy, which is kind of what the dialogues are about. That I'm kind of like geared towards is how do we actively change society, in the world culture. And so it sounds like you're saying the first thing is kind of start talking about it and kind of look at the definitions, which is kind of what you've done. And then get people in. That the big part is the dialogue between people, getting people to know how to dialogue as well in an empathic way.
And I think to understand it on an individual level, because the thing is that you have the self and you have the other. And I don't know if you saw the TED talk with Ramachandra, the way he talked about how you have 10 billion neurons and they're all firing, and some of the mirror neurons are firing when you see someone do something. And it's only your sensory, your skin, that tells you, no, that pain is not my pain, because the same neurons are firing as the other person's. So it makes you realize that there is, on one hand, there's a lot that separates us. On the other, a physical human body, a skin, and so on. On the other hand, there's very little that separates us. And I think that's the dilemma in a way with empathy. You need a strong sense of self to understand that there is another. And then you at the same time need to develop an awareness of, or probably an intellectual awareness, that self and other are connected. There is a space between self and other where one benefits the other, where you do think similarly, or you do have the same qualities, and so on. And then that, to a more practical way of living.
Sorry, your audio went out a little bit there. So it sounds like there's really this distinction. I mean, the sense of self and the sense of connection. It's like those two qualities is really what is of interest to you, and kind of the relationship between those two. So in one sense, that when we have when we're afraid, that our awareness kind of shrinks and we become very, kind of blocked from the other. So you're kind of like looking at seeing the importance of developing a sense of self, as well as how do we kind of transition to a sense of connection.
And I think in an educational system, you need people to understand that, here are two objects, and that they're very similar, but they're not the same. And then in what way are they similar, and in what way they're different. So this idea of actually being aware of the concept of empathy, being aware of the sort of working model, the neurons, the cognitive part, because then once you understand that, once you experience, you suddenly go, oh yeah, I understand. You're literally connecting with other. You're building like a library, and then you can put those experiences into that. So maybe, I mean, for me, it's an intellectual, perhaps more of an intellectual process that's required, because if empathy had been, according to Victoria Galeazzi, empathy is a natural process. It's there, we're born with it. Possibly neonatals already have it when they come out. So if it's a perfect system that exists, then on one level, why do we have such a mess if empathy was so straightforward? So I think it requires cognitive, because life is more complicated than what empathy was originally designed for, which was maternal links with maternal links with the child, and then in-group, out-group, and looking after your group. We're now a much more complex society, which is what Frans de Waal says, and therefore, in a way, we need a more cognitive approach to empathy. So I think it requires starting young, making people aware of it, and then they can relax in it and they can actually feel, you know, more, because it's okay to feel for somebody else if you understand that that's the sort of normal state.
Yeah. Well, you also mentioned people who don't have that sense of self-awareness, and there seems to be a whole community in society around, empaths and highly sensitive people. Did you look at that as well? Because they're like a community that seems to be struggling with the sense of self and feeling kind of like overwhelmed, and
I think that would be a very interesting film in itself. We didn't look at it. We kind of excluded them on the basis that there's no sort of medical basis to say that they're suffering. But I think you're probably right. I didn't meet any people. Well, I met one actually, but I'd be very interested to hear more because I think that's an incredible phenomenon. The one I did met found it really difficult to say no to people, to define his own needs, and spent all his time sort of following other people's lives, not his own.
Yeah. What's I was talking about the dance, the person that holds the dance, Ava. I've talked to her about this, and she said she grew up and her mother was dying of cancer, and it was like she always had to work for other people's needs and just didn't get a strong sense of self. So now it's like it's all about trying to create that sense, those boundaries.
It's such an interesting subject, the whole topic of empathy, because it really is. It's really a spectrum of self and other, and like you said, these people who feel more about who feel less self-awareness or less for themselves do struggle. And I think, then you have the complete other side, and you have psychopaths, and
Yeah.
so I mean, I think it's a very fundamental subject. How did you get involved in empathy, if I can ask?
Yeah, I was actually doing some projects, actually little films, exploring the nature of different values, thematic projects. And then I started looking at, when conservatives were talking about conservative values, I started wondering, well, what are progressive values? And interviewed a whole bunch of people, have a lot of, short videos, online about that. And then that kind of led me to the centrality of empathy, that when I'd ask people, what's your most important value? And they'd say caring. And I say, well, tell me a story about caring. And they'd recount these stories and just kind of go into tears, and then the underneath caring was really empathy, that sense of empathy with others. So that kind of led me to empathy. And then once I kind of got into it, I said, this is central to all of, really life. This is the most fundamental value within society right now. And the more I started learning about it, conflict resolution, just child education and development and the arts. I just saw that it just dealt with every part of society, and it's really one metaphor people always say, it's the glue that holds us together. And, the better we can have super glue, we can make a better society out of it. So I've kind of dedicated the rest of my life to just working on this topic. And I actually came into it from the documentary kind of angle, which was kind of like an initial project, but didn't have the funding and so forth. So I've been just kind of working with the resources I have to create this center. So I'm like really thrilled about your documentary, because I think that's really going to help get the word out.
If it goes the educational route, and if it does well, I think it'll be a great tool. One of the things that you were saying, that it's sort of like it covers everything. That empathy is sort of got its hands in everything else, is connected to everything. Is one of the problems that we found, is that when you're making a film on empathy, we've got neuroscientists, behavioral scientists, we've got clinical psychologists, we've got educationalists, we've got primatologists, we've got people who design machines and robots. So it does, it does deal with all. We've got also victims of empathy in the film, Rwanda and from Bosnia with very, very strong stories. And I think it makes conflict resolution, Israel, lots of things. And I think you realize that it's the one of the things we tried to do in the film is to not we didn't want to preach. We didn't want to show one aspect. We just wanted to show the kind of how empathy is related to so many worlds, so many parts of our lives. And we did that by sort of covering a wide range of topics from, chimpanzees through to robots.
So what did you cover in the film? You had Franz Dual, sounds like Mary Gordon,
And then we had, gosh, I have to remember the order, but I suppose the order doesn't matter. We had Simon Baron Cohen. We had Susan Young, who is a clinical psychologist working with psychopaths. We had Simon Baron Cohen working with autism. We had and just the whole concept of empathy. We had Theodore Zeldin, who's a historian looking at society and how how you can't create change by changing laws. Change, comes from relationships and people realizing things for themselves. And he sort of demonstrated that through history. We have then people, as I said, we have an Israeli student who's doing experiments in Israel with Palestinians and Arabs, Palestinians and Jews, and trying to see if they would sort of a pain test, if they would rate pain, how they would rate pain if it was done to an Arab versus how they would rate pain if it was done to a Jew. And depending on who was their in-group and out-group, they actually rated pain completely differently, which was quite shocking. Both groups did exactly the same. And I'm sure you could do that in any country, in any sort of split situation. We also had a couple of neuroscientists, a very important one, Victor Galeazzi, who found the mirror neurons. Trying to think who else. We had people who built robots. We had refugees from Bosnia, survivors from a concentration camp, and we had someone who is helping refugees from Rwanda and who's experienced empathy, having to deal with that. So it's a lot. Robots are in there. Jeremy Rifkin, who's written The Empathic Civilization, is also in there. And we finish with the internet and sort of wind up asking questions like, well, I think it's Jeremy Rifkin who asked that, and he says, can you really be empathic and efficient at the same time? Because the internet gives you that culture of efficiency. Let's do 5 things at once. Let me get this down properly, quickly, efficiently. And at the same time, let me listen to your story. So, which bit suffers? So I think he asked a very valid question about some of the tools for the future. Facebook on one hand gives us sort of the possibility to be empathic with thousands of people and be connected. But at the same time, you have tools, you have this culture of efficiency, which makes us, which works against that and makes us sort of almost unempathic.
Yeah, well, it really asks, like, efficiency for what? Is it efficiency towards empathy, creating more empathy, or is it efficiency towards creating more stuff?
Creating more stuff. You squish into a day, it's that kind of. So, I mean, it would be good. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it would be good to see how the film gets distributed amongst the public, because I think this distribution company in the States, for example, they distribute mainly, well, only I think to institutions. So I mean, I think we will distribute to individuals, and maybe we can do screenings. I don't know if you have any ideas of like public screenings and stuff.
Oh yeah, definitely here in the Bay Area, we'd be glad to contribute in any way I can to help promote that. One thing and in any other way, we have in the Facebook group, you have like 7 going on 8,000 people, as well as a lot of Facebook causes. Actually, empathy in animals is the most popular cause. Empathy for animals, and there's like almost 30,000 people signed up for that, which is, we have like about on Facebook causes about 20,000 for just let's create a culture of empathy. So, I'm glad to kind of get the word out, and I'm sure Stanford and Berkeley would be glad to show. They showed I Am the movie and Happy the movie so they're definitely folks to connect with here.
Well, maybe what I could do, and now that we're connected by Skype, is that we can have a chat another time and talk through, because I know you're going on holiday as well, and I've got to run.
Okay, great.
Okay, or have we sort of covered everything?
Oh, I could talk for hours, I would like to talk more, because I'm a little concerned because we do have a little beeping sound, in the background, so I'm a little sad about that, because it can be a little annoying. So maybe we can do a little bit more. And also, actually, I've been thinking about what we really need is there's a documentary of the world at war. I don't know if you ever saw it. It's the UK. It's like 12 hours, 6 parts, or whatever. I really think that there's a need for a documentary like that about empathy. So I'd love to talk to you more about that as well, and also how we can promote the film.
Okay, that sounds great.
Until the next time, then, since you've got to go, and it was really a pleasure talking to you, Alex. So,
someone who's so committed to empathy. That's great.
Okay, take care.
Yeah.
See the world through other people's eyes. Empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.